Mind Your Farm Business on realagriculture.com is brought to you by RBC Royal Bank.
Hello, welcome to episode 5 of Mind Your Farm Business, our audio series on real agriculture focusing on ways to improve your farm management skills. My name is Kelvin Hepner. Jack Welch, the former CEO of General Electric, the author of many business management books, once said, quote, "The only truly sustainable competitive advantage is the ability to learn and adapt faster than your competition," end quote. So we're talking about one of the ways of learning and adapting faster than your competition through peer advisor groups on this episode. What are peer advisor groups? What are the benefits to being part of one? How do you join one or form one? Those types of questions. We're going to hear from Dr. Danny Klinefelter of Texas A&M University, a huge advocate of peer groups among farmers. If you're already involved in one, you're probably familiar with some of Dr. Klinefelter's ideas on farm management. You might also be saying, hang on, if I'm wanting to learn or adapt quicker than my competition, why am I looking to other farmers, potentially competitors, for advice? As he explains, peer groups are generally not made up of farmers competing directly against each other. As he mentions numerous times, some or much of the value of being in a peer group is purely the perspectives, the ideas you gain finding out how other farms manage particular issues, whether it's employee-related, marketing, or so on. All right, we're joined by Danny Klinefelter, economist at Texas A&M, and we are talking peer groups, peer advisor groups in agriculture. Maybe just to start, Danny, at a base level, what are peer groups? Is this farmers just talking at the coffee shop, or is this something much more formal than that? Take us through what a peer group is, just first of all, to set the stage.
What I refer to as a more formal group. They usually have a facilitator, and it's typically 8 to 10 members made up of farmers, and it's in a confidential environment. They usually sign a confidentiality agreement, non-compete agreement, and other things. And the issue is to bring up both problems and opportunities that they're having or facing, and to use the rest of the group as a sounding board to get their feedback. There's also occasionally, some of them do benchmarking, financial benchmarking. They don't hand over their whole balance sheet or income statement, but most of it's based on ratios. So how do I stack up against these other people? Because we've tried to put the groups together, usually of top producers. So they're picking the minds of pretty bright people.
I know I've heard some farmers say it, and I think it might relate back to something that you've said, but if you're in a room where everybody else is smarter than you, there's nowhere to go but get smarter. Yes,
and nobody knows it all. Everybody can use some improvement in some area, and that's what you're trying to do. There's usually topics that everybody needs some information on. Others, it's your specific problem, and you're trying to pick the minds, either to help you do due diligence on something you're planning to do, or if, let's say, in benchmarking or anything, you find you're not as strong as the other people. Because part of it is discovering what your strengths and weaknesses are, admitting them, and what I would say is being willing to own them, that it is your problem. You've got to be willing to accept constructive criticism or suggestions. You don't have to. A peer group is different than an advisor, than a board of directors, in that there is no fiduciary liability and they have no governance control over you. It's just to get together to take ideas away and suggestions that you have. It's your choice whether you use them or not.
But there would be a sense of peer pressure or accountability that...
there is a strong sense of accountability. You don't have to do everything, but you have to have a reason for why you don't. And the idea is kind of like people trying to lose weight. If you tell other people that you're going to do it, you tend to feel some sense of pressure to live up to what you say you're going to do.
So how do you how does a farmer go about joining one or forming one?
Well, there's several. There's several independent organizations or facilitators around the country that just put together their own peer groups, invite people to it. In some cases, like in this TPAP program I've been running, the Executive Program for Agricultural Producers, we tell them if there's some guys in this 2 weeks that you've gotten comfortable with, that you respect, why don't 6 or 8 of you or whatever it is get together and either form your own peer group or go to one group I'm affiliated with as Top Producer Executive Network, where you can join and pay a fee, and they provide the facilitator, the benchmarking software, and other things of that nature. Now, those groups just meet 2 times a year, 2 days each time, on different host farms, the farms of the individuals that are in the group. And plus that, they have what they call an annual signature event where all the peer groups get together. Now, one of the advantages to having the facilitators in a formal organization is if there's a question or something in the group that they really can't come up with an answer to, the facilitators can connect with the other facilitators to see if there's a person in another group who has experienced what they're looking for, and they can invite that person to come in and talk to the group.
So along those lines, or to expand on that, how do you decide who should be in a group? Do you worry about farmers competing against each other?
Well, usually, like our TPAN groups, the farmers are 100 miles apart. Now, you can do them close by if you are real confident, that you trust everybody and don't think they're going to try to steal some ground from you or something like that, or an employee. Like in Argentina, they have the APRIA groups. They're the oldest group in the world. They formed over 50 years ago, and there's now over 200 of those groups. But Argentina is a little different. They tend to have groups, everybody in the group is within 100 miles, within a 100-mile radius. So for the most part, they know each other. I don't know what it is about Argentina, but they don't seem to feel as threatened by presenting their own financial information, by going together to fund research projects or do test plots, things of that nature. And those groups take tours to other places, to see something they haven't seen before. Up here, we don't do quite as much of that.
Do you think that's because farmers have traditionally had a very independent mentality? In some cases, that might even be why they're farmers, and that might make it challenging?
Yes. I don't know if it's why they're farmers, but farmers are independent by nature. There's 2 things that are real drawbacks to peer groups being successful. One, the group has to take ownership of its group. They can't just rely on the facilitator to be, quote, the expert that they're just going to ask questions from and learn from. They're intended to learn from each other. And the other is there's enough pride and ego among producers that a lot of times they won't admit their problems. They get together a few times, it gets to be a kind of a social event, and they, everything's okay on my farm. And that's not true. That's why I tell them, those guys in TPAP, if you pick people that you've been eating dinner with, having breaks with, having discussion groups, being in class, everything, for 2 weeks, you've kind of broken down some of those barriers.
So what should a meeting look like, or how much structure is there in terms of the agenda and what happens when a group gets together?
There's quite a bit of structure. There's usually an agenda. The facilitator has normally checked with 2 things. One, with the host farm, what does he want them to look at? They normally talk to his employees separate from the owner to get their input and get a sense of how the staff is feeling, whether they think there are problems or not. So that would be one of them, I guess, in the main things. And the other is by having the agenda. The facilitator really is to keep things on track, to try to involve people that are being very quiet, not saying much, to kind of not let somebody dominate the meeting. And also, if they sense there's any friction developing between some of the people, somebody doesn't like to take the criticism very personally, even though it's intended to be constructive, to try to diffuse those sort of things. But there's a summary at the end of it that the facilitator writes back the meeting and sends out to all the participants. They also are connected by the internet so that they can share ideas back and forth between each other in between meetings. And oftentimes the facilitator will arrange a conference call between the meetings so they can check progress on some things and others. The other thing the facilitator does when he talks to the individual members before a meeting, if somebody knows they have something they want to bring up and they need to present data to other people and their idea, to let them think about it before the meeting, the facilitator makes sure that happens.
So it sounds like the facilitator has a pretty important role in how a peer group works.
Yes, he does. He, again, is not the expert. He's not intended to be, but he's the guy who kind of leads the group through the discussions and things. He isn't injecting his own point of view so much as just making sure that everybody tries to say something constructive. Just, what's your opinion on what this guy's thinking? Have you tried this before? Have you tried it before and failed? If you did, why? Are there some suggestions you could make to the person? Or a little encouragement at times when things, because typically you need to see some alternatives. You'll try something that won't work exactly as you planned. Well, now what do you do? And some of these other people that have been through it before may suggest some alternative ways to approach the problem or something that they've been overlooking. It's kind of like doing a math exam. You get locked in on one approach and you can't step back from it and look at it. All right, let's just wipe the slate clean and look at it in a different approach to it. Once you're so involved in it and invested money, it's kind of, you have a tendency to want to see it through, and you sometimes you're butting your head against the wall. Now, one of the other things that peer groups do is in some cases, some of them have found things they could do well together, like either joint ventures, collaborative arrangements, pooling arrangements, sharing equipment, or even people at times. Some of them, for example, if they need a CFO, but they don't really, they aren't big enough, or it's so expensive to get us a good CFO who can do cost accounting and other things. There have been 3 or 4 of them that have sometimes gone together and hired a CFO, and he or she works for all 4 of them. So they have comparative information, and they get a higher level of expertise than if they would just have their own, like, bookkeeper, or there's somebody on their staff keeping the books that doesn't really know accounting.
Going back to the facilitator, should that be a member of the group, or should that be an outsider or a third party, or how do you figure out who?
Well, I think
organize?
It's best when you're starting off for it to be an outsider, somebody who is professionally trained at facilitating groups. Now, some of these groups, like YPO, Young Presidents Organization, they have what they call CEO forums, which are peer groups. And they're all trained on how to facilitate. And what they do is they rotate the facilitation among the members. So there's both kinds. But again, it takes a little experience. Like one of my best friends was in YPO for 8 years. And then he became too old. He was 50. 50, got to get out of YPO. All the members of his group have continued to meet for 10 years after that, doing self-facilitation. This guy said it's the best management continuing development program he's ever been in. He said, every meeting I hear something I don't like to hear, but I need to hear.
And that's probably the that's an underlying theme of what the value is in joining a peer group?
Yes, it's one of them. One of the things I think is interesting, there was a saying, let me see if I can, the guy's name. It was a guy named Douglas Adams. He was quoted in the book, The Breakthrough Company. He didn't write the book, he was just quoted. He said, human beings who are almost unique in their ability to learn from the experience of others are also remarkable for their apparent disinclination to do so. The other thing people have to realize, everybody out there, all of us, exist in 4 states of knowledge. There's things you know, there's things you don't know, and that's okay. If you know you don't know it, you can look for it. But there's a third thing, there are things you don't know. That's just ignorance. You're just not aware of it. And then there's the other one that happens in politics and other things all the time. There's things you know that just aren't so. You've just accepted this is the truth. I'll believe it and I'll argue it and everything else. And it takes a while to get through to people that you've accepted this doctrine. You need to step back and see the other side has some points too. It's like down here in the States, Democrats and Republicans. They sometimes lock down so much on their own point of view, there isn't any cooperation oftentimes between the two. And to get something really done, they've got to each be willing to compromise a little bit and understand that there is another point of view besides their own.
And on farms, when we're working in the day-to-day, it's easy to get stuck in our point of view and not go beyond the farm for perspective.
Yeah. Yes, and part of it is, you'll ask somebody, why are you doing it that way? Well, because I've always done it that way. My grandfather did it that way, my dad. Well, Tom Peters, who wrote the book Thriving on Chaos, who was also one of the authors of In Search of Excellence, said, basically when you know it all or think you're doing it all right, you got to remind yourself, you just haven't looked hard enough. There's always something that could be made a little better.
Well, that's probably a good note to wrap it up on. So thanks for your time, Danny, and your insight into how peer groups should work. Maybe after listening to this, we'll call someone up that someone we respect, talk about putting together a group or perhaps joining one.
Yeah, anytime.
So why haven't more farmers joined peer advisory groups? I think limited time is probably one of the main reasons. Simply don't have time to get away for more meetings. But then you also have to consider or measure the value of spending that time in a peer advisory setting. The ideas that can be gained, the perspectives, the possible business opportunities, as Dr. Klinefelter alluded to. Sure, there is a social aspect to them as well, but also business benefits. And a lot of this, the value of spending time in a peer advisory group will depend on who's in the group, who facilitates it, and also whether the group can get over those 2 obstacles that Dr. Klinefelter referred to. The first one, the need to take ownership, to actually engage and learn from each other. And the second one, maybe a bit harder, or the hardest part, swallowing our pride can be difficult at times, and the need to admit the problems, mistakes, issues that a farm is dealing with. So thanks again to Dr. Klinefelter for his time. Thanks to RBC for supporting this series. And thank you for joining us. Stay tuned for episode 6 of Mind Your Farm Business.